In September 1944, a German Panther tank commander in eastern France peered through morning fog at what should have been easy targets. His 75mm gun could destroy American Shermans from 2,000 meters away. The Americans could barely scratch his armor at half that distance. On paper, this was no contest. The Panther was the finest medium tank in the world. The Sherman was a mass-produced workhorse that German soldiers mockingly called a Tommy cooker because of how easily it caught fire when hit. But within hours, that Panther commander would watch his entire brigade disintegrate. Not from superior German firepower, not from better German armor, but from something the German High Command had dismissed as impossible. American tankers, the soldiers Berlin had written off as soft amateurs from a nation of shopkeepers, had just executed one of the most devastating armored victories of the entire war. What happened that September morning at Arracourt would shock German commanders who had spent 5 years conquering Europe. It would force them to reassess everything they believed about American fighting capability. And it would prove that the outcome of tank battles depended on far more than the specifications printed in technical manuals. This is the story of how the United States Army transformed from battlefield humiliation to tactical mastery in barely 18 months. How farm boys from Iowa and factory workers from Detroit learned to destroy elite Panzer crews who had conquered Europe, and how a system built on adaptation, coordination, and overwhelming industrial might shock an enemy that believed technology alone would win the war. The Germans were not stupid to underestimate American armor. They had evidence, plenty of it. In February 1943, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel launched his Africa Corps against American forces at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. It was the first major engagement between German and American armor. The results were catastrophic for the Americans. The United States Second Corps attacked in parade ground formations, tanks advancing in neat V-shapes like old cavalry charges. They moved without infantry support, without artillery coordination, without reconnaissance. German intelligence had already dismissed the American military as, quote, Britain's Italians, end quote. Kasserine seemed to prove them right. Rommel's panzers scattered the 1st Armored Division across 30 miles of desert. In 5 days, 2nd Corps was driven back over 50 miles. American losses exceeded 6,500 men, 183 tanks destroyed, over 100 half-tracks lost, more than 200 artillery pieces abandoned, over 500 trucks scattered across the desert. Roughly 20% of the engaged force simply ceased to exist as a fighting unit. The commander of 2nd Corps, Major General Lloyd Fredendall, had built his headquarters in a ravine 70 miles behind the front lines. He communicated in a bizarre personal code that confused his own officers. He refused to visit the front. He had no idea what was happening to his men until it was too late. His leadership, or lack of it, had turned an experienced German offensive into an American catastrophe. German commanders drew a reasonable conclusion. American industry could build impressive quantities of equipment, but American soldiers lacked the warrior spirit to use it effectively. The United States had wealth. It did not have soldiers. This belief was not merely German arrogance. It reflected a genuine military philosophy that had proven itself across 2 continents over 5 years of total war. The Wehrmacht had spent 2 decades developing Blitzkrieg, the lightning war doctrine that combined tanks, aircraft, infantry, and artillery into a single devastating instrument. They had conquered Poland in 4 weeks, France in 6. They had pushed to the gates of Moscow and the sands of Egypt. They had defeated the French army that many considered the finest in the world. They had crushed the Polish cavalry and scattered the British Expeditionary Force at Dunkirk. They had defeated every army they faced. Their tanks reflected this philosophy. The Panther weighed 45 tons and mounted a high-velocity 75mm gun that could penetrate any Allied tank at combat ranges. Its sloped armor was designed using principles learned from studying captured Soviet T-34 tanks. The frontal armor was over 3 inches thick, at an angle that effectively doubled its resistance to incoming shells. The Tiger weighed 57 tons and was virtually invulnerable to frontal attack. Its 88mm gun, derived from the legendary anti-aircraft weapon, was the most feared anti-tank weapon of the war. These were precision instruments designed for armored warfare, crewed by veterans who had fought across 2 continents. Many German tank commanders had been fighting since 1939. They knew their vehicles intimately. They had developed tactics through years of combat experience against the Poles, the French, the British, and the Soviets. The American Sherman weighed 33 tons and mounted a 75mm gun originally designed for infantry support, not tank versus tank combat. Its armor could be penetrated by standard German anti-tank weapons at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. The silhouette was tall and boxy, making it easy to spot and hit. American tank crews had, in many cases, never seen combat before landing in North Africa. Many had completed training only weeks before deployment. The conclusion seemed obvious. German quality would triumph over American quantity. All the factories in Detroit could not change basic military reality. Superior weapons and experienced crews would always defeat inferior weapons and green troops. History, the Germans believed, had proven this time and again. Then came March 23, 1943. Exactly 6 weeks after Kasserine, everything changed. At El Gheta, in Tunisia, the reformed 2nd Corps under George Patton faced another German armoured assault. The 10th Panzer Division committed 50 of its 57 available tanks in a dawn attack down the El Gheta Valley. This was the same division that had helped shatter American forces at Kasserine just weeks before. German commanders expected another easy victory. This time, the Americans were ready. Patton had taken command on March 6, replacing the incompetent Fredendall. In just 17 days, he had transformed the Corps. He imposed strict discipline, fining officers who appeared without proper uniform and demanding that every soldier wear his helmet at all times. He demanded officers lead from the front. He coordinated infantry, artillery, and armor into a combined arms team. Most importantly, he made sure his men understood they were fighting a system, not just enemy tanks. The German tanks hit a minefield that stalled 8 vehicles at the valley entrance. Behind the minefield waited the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion with their M3 gun motor carriages, half-tracks mounting 75mm guns. These were not tanks. They were mobile anti-tank platforms designed specifically to destroy panzers from concealed positions. As the German tanks bunched up trying to navigate the obstacles, American tank destroyers opened fire from concealed positions along the valley walls. Artillery observers called in coordinates. Shells began falling within minutes. The coordination that had been absent at Kasserine was now functioning with deadly precision. The German tanks were caught in a kill zone. They could not advance through the minefield. They could not retreat without exposing their thinner rear armor to the American guns. They could not locate the American positions hidden among the rocks and scrub. The dust and smoke from explosions made visibility nearly impossible. When the smoke cleared, the 10th Panzer Division had lost over 30 tanks to all causes. The 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion claimed 37 kills among 52 armoured vehicles destroyed. It was the first time American forces had defeated an experienced German armoured formation in open battle. The speed of the transformation stunned Rommel himself. 6 weeks earlier, Americans had fled in disorder from his tanks. Now they were destroying them with systematic precision. In his private papers, Rommel later acknowledged that American commanders had learned mobile warfare with remarkable speed. The same army that had collapsed at Kasserine was now standing firm and destroying German panzers. But El Gheta was merely the beginning. What the Germans did not yet understand was that they were facing something more dangerous than improved tactics or better leadership. They were facing a system designed for continuous adaptation. The American approach to armoured warfare differed fundamentally from the German model, where Germany built superior individual weapons, America built superior coordination. Where Germany relied on elite crews, America created processes that made average crews effective. Where Germany perfected the tank, America perfected the combined arms team. This system had 4 pillars that would prove decisive in every major engagement from North Africa to the heart of Germany. Artillery coordination, air-ground integration, field adaptation, and logistics so overwhelming that German commanders struggled to comprehend the scale. Consider artillery. The United States Army perfected time-on-target fire missions to a degree no other force could match. British forces had pioneered the concept in North Africa in late 1941, using BBC time signals to synchronize their guns. Americans industrialized the technique and expanded it to an unprecedented scale. Time on target synchronized multiple artillery batteries so that all shells, fired from different distances at different trajectories, would impact simultaneously. The target received no warning. No time to take cover between the first shell and the devastating barrage that followed. Forward observers embedded with frontline units could call for battalion fire support and receive it within 3 minutes. Divisional artillery arrived in 6 minutes. Corps-level massed fires in 9 minutes. German artillery typically required 30 minutes or more to respond to fire requests. The Americans were 4 to 10 times faster at every echelon. The effect on German forces was devastating beyond anything they had experienced on other fronts. Infantry caught in the open by time-on-target barrages suffered catastrophic casualties before they could react. Tank formations that paused to regroup found themselves targeted by dozens of guns simultaneously. The psychological impact was as significant as the physical destruction. German soldiers learned to dread American artillery with an intensity that exceeded their fear of tanks or aircraft. Fritz Bayerlein, commanding the elite Panzer Lehr Division, experienced this system firsthand during Operation Cobra in July 1944. In his account, he described the bombardment with horror. Quote, "Simultaneously with the storm from the air, innumerable guns of American artillery poured drum fire into our field positions." End quote. The artillery was devastating alone. Combined with air power, it became apocalyptic. The partnership between ground forces and tactical aviation reached its peak in the relationship between General George Patton's Third Army and Brigadier General Otto Wayland's 19th Tactical Air Command. This was not merely cooperation between separate services. It was genuine integration at every level of command. Air liaison officers rode inside lead tanks carrying VHF radios. When a column encountered resistance, the liaison officer could direct P-47 Thunderbolts onto the target within minutes. Pilots and tankers developed personal relationships. They learned each other's capabilities and limitations. They created improvised tactics that no manual had anticipated. The Air Force and Army became, in effect, a single fighting organism. Fighter bombers flew armored column cover, ranging ahead of advancing tank formations to destroy ambushes before ground troops arrived. They attacked bridges to trap retreating Germans. They strafed supply convoys and fuel dumps. They turned every road in France into a killing ground for German vehicles attempting to move in daylight. Any column of vehicles that appeared on the roads could expect attack within minutes. German soldiers called the Thunderbolts Jabos, short for Jagdbomber or fighter bomber. They nicknamed the Normandy front the Jaborennstrecke, the fighter bomber racecourse. Any vehicle that moved during daylight attracted immediate attack. German commanders were forced to conduct all movement at night, drastically slowing their operations and making coordinated maneuver nearly impossible. Field Marshal Guenther von Kluge, commanding German forces in the West, wrote directly to Hitler about the problem. Quote, "In the face of the total enemy air superiority, we can adopt no tactics to compensate for the annihilating power of air except to retire from the battlefield." End quote. Adolf Galland, General of Fighters for the Luftwaffe, was equally blunt about German impotence in the skies over France. Quote, "From the very first moment of the invasion, the Allies had absolute air superiority. Therefore the enemy, our own troops and the population asked the obvious question, where is the Luftwaffe?" End quote. There was no answer. The Luftwaffe had been ground down over Germany by the strategic bombing campaign and the attritional air battles that had raged since 1943. It had virtually nothing left for the Western Front. The skies belonged to the Allies. But the system's true genius was its capacity for adaptation. Americans did not merely execute pre-war doctrine. They rewrote doctrine continuously based on combat experience. And no innovation better illustrated this than what happened in the hedgerow country of Normandy. After D-Day, Allied forces found themselves trapped in the bocage. Ancient earth embankments averaging 4 feet high, crowned with tangled hedges up to 15 feet tall, root systems extending 3 to 12 feet deep. These walls surrounded tiny fields no wider than 300 feet. French farmers had built them over centuries to mark boundaries and protect crops from the Atlantic winds. The terrain was a defender's paradise and an attacker's nightmare. When Sherman tanks tried to climb over hedgerows, they exposed their thin belly armor to German anti-tank weapons waiting on the other side. Existing gaps in the hedgerows were pre-registered with Panzerfaust teams positioned in ambush. Every gap was a death trap. Tank after tank was destroyed trying to push through the obvious routes. Advances slowed to roughly 1 mile per day at horrific cost. Allied commanders began to worry that the entire Normandy campaign might stall indefinitely, pinned down in terrain that negated their advantages in mobility and firepower. The solution came not from generals or engineers, but from Sergeant Curtis Culin, the 3rd of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron. Culin was a 30-year-old National Guardsman from Cranford, New Jersey. Before the war, he had worked as a sales promotion assistant for Schenley Industries, a liquor distributor. He had no engineering training, no special technical expertise. He was simply a soldier who paid attention to problems and refused to accept that they were unsolvable. During a brainstorming session about the hedgerow problem, a Tennessee soldier named Roberts made an offhand suggestion. Why not put saw teeth on the front of tanks and cut through the hedges instead of climbing over them? Most of the men laughed at the idea. Culin did not. He fashioned a 4-pronged steel plough from captured German beach obstacles, the Czech hedgehog anti-invasion barriers that had littered the Normandy beaches on D-Day. These X-shaped steel structures had been designed to rip the bottoms out of landing craft. Culin welded this crude device to the bow of a Sherman tank. On July 14, 1944, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley watched the demonstration. As he later recalled in his memoir A Soldier's Story, the tank backed off and ran head-on toward a hedgerow at 10 miles per hour. Its tusks bored into the wall, pinned down the belly, and the tank broke through under a canopy of dirt. Bradley immediately grasped the implications. He ordered mass production. Ordnance units worked around the clock under camouflage netting, cutting beach obstacles into teeth. Welders worked in shifts that ran 24 hours a day. Within 11 days, by the launch of Operation Cobra on July 25, approximately 500 Rhino devices had been manufactured. 3 out of every 5 tanks in First Army carried the modification. A sergeant with no engineering background had solved a problem that was paralyzing an entire army group, not through superior technology, through improvisation using enemy scrap metal. The Germans had designed those beach obstacles to stop the invasion. Now they were enabling American tanks to break out of Normandy. General Dwight Eisenhower later reflected, quote, "The biggest and happiest group, I suppose, in all the Allied armies that night were those that knew that this thing worked." End quote. Culin received the Legion of Merit for his invention. 4 months later, he lost a leg to a landmine in the Huertgen forest. He returned home, worked again as a salesman for Schenley, and died in 1963 at age 48. He lies largely forgotten outside military history circles, but his invention helped enable the most devastating ground attack of the entire Normandy campaign. Operation Cobra began on the morning of July 25, 1944. Bradley's plan concentrated the full weight of 7th Corps on a narrow 7,000-yard front west of St. Lo. This was a radical departure from the broad front attacks that had bled First Army for weeks. Instead of pushing everywhere and succeeding nowhere, Bradley would smash through at one point and exploit the gap with everything he had. The bombardment was unlike anything the Western Front had seen. 1,500 heavy bombers dropped 3,300 tons of explosives. Another 600 medium bombers followed. Fighter bombers rained 60,000 incendiary bombs across 12 square kilometers. It was the largest carpet bombing in support of ground troops in the history of warfare. Fritz Bayerlein's Panzer Lehr division sat directly in the impact zone. His account remains one of the most harrowing primary sources of the entire conflict. Quote, "The bombers came as if on a conveyor belt. Back and forth the carpets were laid. Artillery positions were wiped out, tanks overturned and buried, infantry positions flattened. Several of my men went mad and rushed round in the open until they were cut down by splinters." End quote. When Field Marshal von Klug demanded that Bayerlein hold the line, the Panzer Lehr commander replied with words that captured the hopelessness of his situation. Quote, Out in front, everyone is holding out. Everyone. My grenadiers and my engineers and my tank crews, they are all holding their ground. Not a single man is leaving his post. They are lying silent in their foxholes because they are dead." End quote. Over 70% of Panzerlehr's soldiers were killed, wounded, or incapacitated in a single morning. One of the most elite divisions in the German army had been effectively destroyed before American ground troops even crossed the start line. The breakthrough accelerated with stunning speed. The Rhino-equipped Shermans tore through the hedgerows. German defensive positions were outflanked before they could respond. The carefully prepared kill zones became irrelevant when American tanks simply went around them through the fields. By July 28th, the 4th Armoured Division had seized Coutances. By July 31st, it captured Avranches, 35 miles, and 20,000 prisoners in 6 days. Patton took command of the newly activated Third Army on August 1st and turned the breach into a torrent that would not stop until it reached the German border. The German attempt to counterattack at Mortain on August 7th, with 4 panzer divisions and 145 tanks, was stopped cold by combined arms defense and punishing air attacks. American infantry held key terrain while fighter bombers destroyed German armor caught in the open. Within days, the Germans were fleeing toward the Falaise Gap, where over 50,000 would be captured and the German army in the west would be shattered. Germany committed approximately 2,300 tanks and assault guns to the Normandy campaign. Only 100 to 120 escaped across the Seine River. The rest were destroyed, abandoned, or captured. It was a catastrophe from which the German army in the West would never recover. But the true test of American armoured supremacy came 2 months later, in a place called Arracourt. The Battle of Arracourt, fought between September 18th and 29th, 1944, is taught at West Point as a masterclass in mobile defense. It is the definitive case study in how American tactics defeated technically superior German armor through superior training, terrain awareness, and combined arms coordination. After Patton's Third Army raced 300 miles across France, fuel shortages halted the advance on September 1st. The logistical system that had moved so much, so fast, simply could not keep up. Tanks sat idle waiting for gasoline. The pause was frustrating but unavoidable. Germany seized the pause to assemble a massive armoured counteroffensive. General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army gathered 262 tanks and assault guns. The force included brand new Panthers from the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades. On paper, it was a formidable force that should have crushed the outnumbered Americans. In reality, it was fatally flawed. Opposing them was Combat Command A of the 4th Armoured Division under Colonel Bruce Clark. Clark had fewer than 100 tanks available. He was vastly outnumbered, but the German Panzer brigades had a fatal weakness that would prove decisive. Their crews had received only 2 weeks of training. Many could not read maps. They had never worked together as units. They lacked integral reconnaissance elements and had no organic artillery support. The Panthers were excellent tanks. The men inside them barely knew how to operate them. They were rushing into battle against veterans who had been fighting and winning since Normandy. The battle opened on September 19th in heavy fog and rain. The same fog that gave the Germans tactical surprise also negated the Panthers' greatest advantage. The German 75mm gun could destroy Shermans at 2,000 meters, but the fog reduced visibility to a few hundred meters. At close range, crew skill mattered far more than ballistic superiority. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams commanded the 37th Tank Battalion at the center of the American defense. His tankers fought from concealed, hull-down positions on terrain they had already scouted during the weeks of static defense. They exploited fire and maneuver tactics that flanked the advancing Germans rather than confronting them head-on. When German tanks appeared out of the fog, American crews were already in position with guns trained on likely approach routes. The Germans had to search for targets while driving forward. The Americans merely had to wait and shoot. In tank warfare, the side that fires first almost always wins. The Americans fired first. A single platoon of 4 M18 Hellcat tank destroyers under Lieutenant Edwin Leiper of Charlie Company, 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, executed one of the most devastating ambushes of the entire campaign. The M18 Hellcat represented a uniquely American approach to anti-tank warfare. While Germans built ever heavier tanks with thicker armor, Americans built the opposite. The Hellcat weighed only 18 tons. Its armor was thin enough that heavy machine gun fire could penetrate it at close range, but it was the fastest tracked vehicle of the war, capable of 55 miles per hour on roads. It mounted a 76mm gun that could destroy any German tank from the flank or rear. The doctrine was simple: do not trade blows with Panthers. Use speed and concealment to get the first shot. Kill and relocate before the enemy can respond. The Hellcat was not designed to survive being hit. It was designed to avoid being hit while killing the enemy. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion was the first unit in the Army to receive M18 Hellcats, taking delivery in May 1944. By Arracourt, they had perfected their tactics through months of combat experience. Leper positioned his 4 vehicles behind a low ridge overlooking the German approach route. The fog that morning was thick enough to hide his position, but thin enough to see the Panthers when they came within range. When the German tanks appeared, the Hellcats fired from concealment at close range. The Panthers had no idea where the shots were coming from. Leiper's 4 vehicles destroyed approximately 15 German tanks while losing 3 of their own. The surviving Hellcat withdrew before the Germans could organize a response. It was a kill ratio that vindicated everything the tank destroyer force had been designed to achieve. Across the war, tank destroyer battalions compiled impressive records. The M18 Hellcat achieved an overall kill-to-loss ratio of 2.4 to 1, with 526 confirmed enemy tank kills. In Europe alone, the ratio was 2.3 to 1. These were not statistics achieved by superior armor or firepower. They were achieved by superior tactics, training, and doctrine. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion claimed dozens of Panzer kills during the Arracourt campaign alone. Their commander later noted that the key was never to fight fair. Fair fights got tank destroyers killed. Ambush, flank shots, and immediate withdrawal after engagement kept his men alive while the Germans died. On September 20th, Major Charles Carpenter entered the battle in the most unlikely fashion. Carpenter was an artillery observation pilot flying a Piper L-4 Grasshopper, a fabric-covered aircraft designed for spotting, not combat. The plane weighed less than 1,000 pounds and had a top speed of 85 miles per hour. It was about as far from a fighter plane as an aircraft could be while still having wings. Carpenter had modified his aircraft, nicknamed Rosie the Rocketer, by strapping 6 bazooka tubes to the wing struts. When he spotted Panthers advancing below, he dove and fired. German tank commanders were not accustomed to being attacked by what appeared to be a recreational aircraft. Carpenter destroyed or disabled at least 2 tanks from the air that day. Over his combat career, he was credited with 6 tank kills, making him perhaps the only pilot in history to become an armored vehicle ace in a fabric-covered observation plane. By month's end, Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army had been shattered. Of 262 tanks and assault guns committed to the offensive, only 62 remained operational. 86 were completely destroyed. 114 were damaged or broken down and abandoned. The brand-new Panzer brigades had been annihilated in their first major engagement. Combat Command A lost 25 Shermans and 7 tank destroyers. The exchange ratio approached 3 to 1 in America's favor. Sherman tanks manned by crews with months of combat experience had systematically destroyed Panthers crewed by men with 2 weeks of training. Arracourt proved conclusively what statistical analysis would later confirm. A post-war study by the Army's Ballistic Research Laboratory examined 30 armor-on-armor engagements involving the 3rd and 4th Armored Divisions. The Sherman achieved a 3.6 to 1 kill ratio against the Panther, not because the Sherman was a better tank. It was not. The Panther was superior in armor, firepower, and tactical mobility on the individual vehicle level. No honest assessment could conclude otherwise. But the 4th Armored Division was a better fighting force. Its crews were experienced, its tactics were sound, its combined arms integration was seamless, and its leaders understood that the first shot almost always decided the engagement, regardless of which tank fired it. The men who executed these tactics deserve recognition because they were not supermen. They were ordinary Americans who became extraordinary through experience and leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams was the finest American tank battalion commander of the war. His 37th Tank Battalion saw more tank versus tank combat than nearly any other American unit. Abrams went through 7 tanks during the war, all named Thunderbolt. His personal crew destroyed dozens of German armored vehicles across France, Belgium, and Germany. Abrams led from the front. He was always in the lead tank during attacks. He knew his men personally. He understood their capabilities and pushed them to exceed what they thought possible. Patton himself declared, quote, "I am supposed to be the best tank commander in the army, but I have one peer, Abe Abrams. He is the world champion." End quote. After the war, Abrams rose through the ranks to become Army Chief of Staff and commanded American forces in Vietnam. The M1 Abrams main battle tank, the finest armored vehicle in the world today, bears his name. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Pool of the 3rd Armored Division was America's tank ace. In just 81 days of combat between June 27 and September 15, 1944, Pool destroyed 12 tanks and 258 other vehicles, including self-propelled guns, armored cars, and trucks. Pool commanded 3 successive Shermans, all named In the Mood after the Glenn Miller song. He kept the same 4-man crew throughout his combat career, a testament to the value of crew cohesion. They knew each other's movements instinctively. They operated as a single organism. Pool's war ended on September 15, 1944, when a Panther's shell struck his tank. The explosion took his right leg 8 inches above the knee. The character War Daddy in the 2014 film Fury was reportedly inspired by his exploits. Major General Maurice Rose commanded the 3rd Armored Division, known as Spearhead. Rose was the son of a rabbi from Denver. He had enlisted as a private in 1916 and risen through the ranks entirely on merit. He was the highest-ranking Jewish officer in the United States Army. Under Rose's aggressive frontline leadership, the 3rd Armored compiled an extraordinary record. First American armored unit to enter Germany. First to breach the Siegfried Line. First to enter Cologne. Rose personally led from the front, often in a jeep ahead of his tanks, because he believed commanders needed to see the battlefield with their own eyes. Rose was the highest-ranking American officer killed by enemy fire in the European theatre. On March 30, 1945, near Paderborn, his jeep was surrounded by German tanks from SS Brigade Westphalen. As Rose apparently reached toward his holster, a German tank crew member shot him with a machine pistol. He was 45 years old. Major General John Wood trained and led the 4th Armored Division to its extraordinary combat record. Basil Liddell Hart, Britain's foremost military theorist, spent 2 days interviewing Wood after the war. Liddell Hart called him the Rommel of the American armored forces and one of the most dynamic commanders of armor in World War II. Wood emphasized speed and shock action. He trained his tankers to bypass resistance and strike deep into enemy rear areas. He demanded combined arms coordination at every level. His methods produced results that speak for themselves. The 4th Armored Division's wartime record: 90,354 prisoners taken, 579 German tanks destroyed or captured, 9 unit citations for extraordinary heroism in action. But individual heroism was only possible because of the system that supported it, and that system was built on numbers that German commanders could not comprehend until it was too late. The United States produced 49,324 M4 Shermans during the war. Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panthers, 1,350 Tiger Is, and 492 Tiger IIs. The ratio exceeded 6-to-1 on medium and heavy tanks alone. At peak production, American factories built over 2,000 Shermans per month. Germany's Panther production peaked at 380 per month in July 1944. Tiger I production never exceeded 104 per month. But raw numbers only begin to capture the disparity. The real American advantage was not just producing more tanks, it was keeping them running. The Sherman was designed for mass maintenance from the beginning. Engineers at the Detroit Arsenal prioritized reliability and ease of repair over cutting-edge performance. Every major component was designed to be accessed quickly. An entire engine could be swapped in hours in the field by ordinary mechanics with standard tools. In contrast, changing a Panther transmission required specialized equipment and could take days. The American 5-echelon maintenance system was the most sophisticated repair network any army had ever fielded. At the first echelon, tank crews performed daily maintenance and minor repairs themselves. At the second echelon, company mechanics handled more complex work. Third echelon was battalion level, with more equipment and expertise. Fourth echelon meant division ordnance companies with mobile machine shops. Fifth echelon was base overhaul facilities that could rebuild vehicles from the ground up. This system kept operational rates high even after devastating losses. A Sherman knocked out on Monday might be back in action by Friday. A Panther knocked out on Monday might sit abandoned for lack of recovery vehicles and spare parts. The 3rd Armoured Division's experience illustrates the system's power. It entered Normandy with 232 Shermans. During the campaign, it lost 648 tanks completely destroyed. Another 700 were knocked out, repaired, and returned to service. That was a 580% replacement cycle that kept the division at fighting strength throughout the war. German commanders watching American units absorb catastrophic losses and keep fighting could not understand how it was possible. They were used to armies that broke when tank strength dropped below certain thresholds. The Americans seemed immune to attrition because their maintenance and replacement systems could absorb losses that would have crippled a German Panzer division. The supply network behind this system was equally impressive. The Red Ball Express, the famous truck convoy route from Normandy to the front, moved over 12,500 tons of supplies daily at its peak. Over 6,000 trucks ran continuously, drivers working in shifts to keep the columns moving 24 hours a day. When fuel shortages finally halted Patton's advance in September 1944, it was not because the system had failed. It was because the advance had been so rapid that even this massive effort could not keep up. German forces faced the inverse reality. The Panther suffered chronic final drive failures. The transmission was based on a pre-war design never intended for a 45-ton vehicle. Roughly 5% of Panthers broke down within 100 kilometers of road travel. 90% failed within 1,500 kilometers. Neither Tigers nor Panthers could travel appreciable distances under their own power. They required rail transport, and Tigers were too wide for standard rail cars. German divisions routinely operated below 50% armoured strength, not because of combat losses, but because of mechanical breakdowns and inability to recover damaged vehicles. The cost of German miscalculation became visible in the final months of the war. Every strategic assumption the German High Command had made about American fighting capability had proven wrong. They had assumed American soldiers were soft. The men who fought through the hedgerows of Normandy and the frozen forests of the Bulge proved otherwise. They had assumed American industry could not compensate for inferior tactics. The transformation from Kasserine to Arracourt proved otherwise. They had assumed superior German technology would always triumph. The kill ratios achieved by experienced American crews in inferior tanks proved otherwise. December 16, 1944. Germany launched its last great offensive through the Ardennes forest. 250,000 men, over 1,400 tanks. The goal was to split the Allied armies, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. It was the last gamble of a regime that had run out of options. American tankers fought critical holding actions throughout the Bulge. At St. Vith, Brigadier General Bruce Clark, the same officer who had commanded Combat Command A at Arracourt, denied the Germans a vital road junction for 6 critical days. His Combat Command B of the 7th Armoured Division bought time that wrecked the German timetable. At Celle, the 2nd Armoured Division encircled and annihilated the spearhead of the German 2nd Panzer Division just 4 miles from the Meuse River. This was the high watermark of the offensive. The Germans would get no closer to their objective. But the signature achievement was Patton's relief of Bastogne. It remains the greatest operational maneuver of the entire Western War. The German offensive had surrounded the key crossroads town of Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne Division and elements of the 10th Armoured Division held out against overwhelming odds. When the German commander demanded surrender, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe famously replied with a single word: nuts. But defiance alone would not save Bastogne. The garrison needed relief. Patton's intelligence officer, Colonel Oskar Koch, had detected signs of the German build-up by mid-November. Patton, always thinking ahead, prepared 3 contingency plans codenamed Cent, Nickel, and Dime. Each plan detailed how Third Army could disengage from its current operations and wheel north into the German flank. At the December 19th meeting in Verdun, Patton stunned the assembled commanders by promising to disengage 3 divisions from combat on the Saar front, turn them 90 degrees, and attack north within 48 hours. Eisenhower was skeptical. No army had ever executed such a maneuver at such speed. After the meeting, Patton phoned his headquarters with 2 words: play ball. The scale of what followed was staggering. More than 133,000 vehicles reoriented on icy roads in blizzard conditions. Over 62,000 tons of supplies shifted. 4,500 tons of ammunition moved daily. The 4th Armored Division marched 150 miles in 19 hours. Men drove without sleep through snow and ice. Tanks broke down and were pushed to the roadside. The column kept moving. On December 26th, Lieutenant Colonel Abrams had just 20 operational tanks remaining. The division had been fighting through German resistance for days. His men were exhausted, but Bastogne needed them. Abrams gave the order: we are going into those people now. Let her roll. First Lieutenant Charles Bulge, commanding an M4A3E2 jumbo Sherman nicknamed Cobra King, led 9 tanks through the village of Assenois, under cover of 2,340 artillery shells fired by 13 batteries. The barrage lasted just 8 minutes, but left the German defenders stunned. At 4:50 in the afternoon, Bulge reached the Bastogne perimeter. The first man he encountered was 2nd Lieutenant Dwayne Webster of the 326th Airborne Infantry Engineer Battalion. "How are you?" Bulge asked. "Glad to see you," Webster replied. The 10-day siege was broken. Cobra King, now restored and preserved at the National Museum of the United States Army, remains a symbol of American determination and tactical excellence. German commanders who survived the war left assessments that reveal how completely their initial assumptions had been overturned. Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored doctrine, the man who had designed the Panzer forces that conquered Europe, told American interrogators in 1945, quote, "I hear much about General Patton, and he conducted a good campaign. From the standpoint of a tank specialist, I must congratulate him on his victory, since he acted as I would have done had I been in his place." End quote. Genther Blumentritt, Chief of Staff of OB West, was more expansive. Quote, "We regarded General Patton extremely highly as the most aggressive panzer general of the Allies. He even improved on Napoleon's basic tenet, activite, vitesse, vitesse." End quote. Activity, speed, speed. These assessments must be read carefully. Historians Ronald Smelser and Edward Davies have characterized post-war German memoirs as exculpatory. The generals consistently emphasized their own tactical brilliance while attributing defeat to Hitler's interference and Allied material superiority. Yet the tactical observations appear genuine. American combined arms effectiveness, artillery speed, logistical depth, and air-ground coordination genuinely surprised commanders who had conquered most of Europe with their panzer forces. What shocked German panzer crews was not the Sherman's armor or gun. Both were inferior to the Panther and Tiger. What shocked them was the system surrounding the Sherman. Artillery that arrived in 3 minutes, fighter bombers overhead within radio call, infantry teams clearing anti-tank threats, maintenance crews that returned knocked-out tanks to service within days, and a production line that built 6 Shermans for every Panther Germany could assemble. The Ballistic Research Laboratory Study's 3.6-to-1 kill ratio tells the real story. First, shot advantage mattered more than armor thickness. Crew training mattered more than gun caliber. Reconnaissance and combined arms coordination mattered more than muzzle velocity. From Sergeant Culin's hedgerow cutter fashioned from enemy beach obstacles to Patton's 133,000 vehicle pivot at the Bulge, American armored warfare was defined by adaptive improvisation at every level. From a sergeant welding scrap steel in a Norman field to a 4-star general rewriting the operational map in 48 hours. The Germans had expected amateurs. They had expected a nation of shopkeepers and factory workers to wilt before the warrior spirit of the Wehrmacht. By 1945, Guderian was offering congratulations. The lesson extends beyond military history. Organizations that build systems for adaptation outperform those that optimize individual components. Flexibility beats rigidity. Coordination beats isolation. The ability to learn from failure, quickly and systematically, can overcome initial disadvantage. The United States Army of February 1943 was routed at Kasserine. The United States Army of September 1944 annihilated elite Panzer brigades at Arracourt, 18 months. Same basic equipment, same training pipeline, radically different results. The difference was not technology. The Sherman did not magically become a better tank between Tunisia and France. The difference was learning, systematic, institutionalized learning that transformed failure into wisdom and wisdom into victory. If this story of adaptation, improvisation, and systematic excellence resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel. We explore the hidden turning points of history, the moments when underdogs became champions and conventional wisdom proved wrong. Like this video if you found value in it. Share it with someone who appreciates military history or lessons in organizational transformation. And leave a comment below. What other stories of rapid military adaptation would you like us to explore? The comments help shape future content. Until next time.